It ran for 26 years. It invented television science fiction as Britain knows it. And it was mismanaged, underfunded, nearly cancelled multiple times and treated with institutional contempt by the very organisation that made it. This is the real history of classic Doctor Who, the version the BBC never put in the press release. Fact 1. The BBC never wanted it.
Base is steady.
Layer of sand, rough formation. Good.
Left 1963.
Oh, yes, undoubtedly.
Doctor Who was not a show the BBC commissioned with enthusiasm. It was created largely because the corporation needed something to fill a Saturday evening slot in 1963, and an internal committee tasked with developing new programming was running out of options. Sidney Newman, the BBC's Canadian-born head of drama, pushed the concept through over considerable internal resistance. Many senior figures felt science fiction was lowbrow, associated with cheap American imports rather than serious British broadcasting. The show was specifically designed to be educational. The original brief stated it should use time travel to teach children about history and science. The Daleks, which turned it into a phenomenon, arrived against Newman's explicit wishes. He had ordered the writers to avoid what he called bug-eyed monsters. The first producer, Verity Lambert, was 27 years old and the only female producer at the BBC at the time. She fought constantly against a corporation that was simultaneously funding the show and regarding it with faint embarrassment. Doctor Who survived its birthplace's indifference and became the longest-running science fiction series in television history. The BBC spent decades claiming credit for a show it had never truly believed in.
There must be some explanation.
There's still a police box. Why hasn't it changed? Dear, dear. How very disturbing.
Fact 2. Regeneration was kept secret.
My arms are tingling. Yes, Aladdin said you'd feel that. It just means the drug's working, that's all.
When William Hartnell's health made it impossible for him to continue in 1966, the production team faced a problem with no precedent in television. Their lead actor could not continue, but the show could not simply recast the role. Hartnell was too closely identified with the character. The solution, that the Doctor could transform completely into a different person, was presented to audiences with almost no advance warning. There was no press release, no announcement. Viewers watching The 10th Planet in 1966 simply saw the Doctor collapse and become someone else. The BBC kept the nature of the transformation deliberately vague. The word regeneration was not even used until 1974. For years, the process was referred to obliquely, with no official explanation of what it meant or how many times it could happen. This secrecy was not mystique by design. It was uncertainty by circumstance. The production team was solving an immediate casting problem and hoping the audience would accept it. What they accidentally created was one of the most flexible storytelling devices in television history, a mechanism allowing the show to reinvent itself indefinitely. It came not from vision but from desperation.
This Aladdin of yours seems to have kept his wits about him, giving you that extra supply of drugs.
Yes.
Fact 3. The Daleks nearly bankrupted production.
The report for the neutron bomb is prepared. Let us hear it.
The Daleks debuted in the second serial of Doctor Who in late 1963 and immediately transformed the show from a modest educational programme into a national obsession. The BBC was wholly unprepared for what happened next. Dalek merchandise began appearing almost immediately. But the BBC had a problem. They did not own the Daleks. Creator Terry Nation had retained the rights and his agent moved quickly to exploit them commercially. The BBC found itself having created a cultural phenomenon it could not fully control. The cost of featuring the Daleks became a recurring source of tension. Nation's team charged fees that strained the already limited budget. There were periods when the Daleks were absent, not for creative reasons, but because production simply could not afford them. Nation at various points threatened to license the Daleks to American producers for their own series entirely separate from Doctor Who. These negotiations came close to completion. Had they succeeded, the BBC might have found its most iconic creation appearing on a rival network. What audiences saw as the show's greatest asset was, behind the scenes, one of its most persistent headaches.
Can't have.
No. The Daleks took it from me when they searched me. It must be down there somewhere.
Fact 4. Season 23 was almost the end.
Would it be too much to ask what all this is about?
The accused will remain silent until invited to speak.
The accused?
In 1985, BBC controller Michael Grade put Doctor Who on an 18-month hiatus, describing the show publicly as too violent and of poor quality. The announcement was made without consulting the production team. What was not made public was the extent to which Grade personally disliked the programme. He later acknowledged he had never been a fan. His decision was driven as much by personal taste as by any objective assessment of the ratings. Producer John Nathan Turner was instructed to make changes to the format, but given little guidance on what those changes should be. The BBC's criticism was simultaneously pointed and vague. The fan response was fierce. A campaign called Hands Off Doctor Who generated significant press coverage and genuine public pressure. The corporation had not anticipated that an audience would mobilise so visibly around a programme they were trying to quietly sideline. The show returned in 1986 with season 23. Without the fan campaign, the 1985 hiatus might have been permanent, 14 years earlier than it eventually became.
It's my unpleasant task, Madam Inquisitor, to prove to the inquiry that the Doctor is an incorrigible meddler in the affairs of other peoples and planets.
Fact 5. Patrick Troughton's hidden struggle.
Don't touch that. That gun may be wound up too. It's a trap. No, I don't think so. I think it's a testing room for weapons.
Patrick Troughton, who played the Second Doctor from 1966 to 1969, is widely regarded by those who worked with him as one of the finest actors to have inhabited the role. He is also one of the least understood, partly because so much of his work no longer exists. Troughton found the demands grueling in ways he rarely discussed publicly. The production schedule was relentless, filming almost year-round with minimal breaks, learning large volumes of dialogue under pressure. He was in his mid-40s during his tenure and found the pace exhausting. He was also deeply uncomfortable with fame. The sudden public recognition sat uneasily with a man who had spent his career as a character actor, someone who disappeared into roles rather than becoming a celebrity. Troughton left in 1969 and in later years strongly advised subsequent actors not to stay too long. He told Tom Baker and Peter Davison directly that the role had a cost, that it consumed the person playing it in ways not immediately obvious. His warning proved accurate more often than not. The history of the classic series is filled with actors who stayed longer than was good for them, or who left carrying a weight they had not expected.
This is a purely robotic Cyberman. There's no human material in it at all. He's a target.
Fact 6. Script editors held real power.
Now, on Earth, we have a saying, rich beyond the dreams of avarice. I think he's discovered something.
One of the least visible but most significant roles in classic Doctor Who was the script editor. Unlike the producer, who dealt with budgets and the BBC's institutional demands, the script editor shaped the show's creative identity, often more than the writers whose names appeared on screen. Script editors like Terence Dix, Robert Holmes and Douglas Adams were frequently writing significant portions of scripts themselves, sometimes rewriting entire episodes without receiving any credit. Their contributions to the show's mythology and tone were enormous and largely unacknowledged. Robert Holmes in particular rewrote so extensively that it is difficult to know how much of the aired material was genuinely the credited writer's work. He was protective of the show's quality in ways that put him in direct conflict with both producers and the BBC hierarchy. Douglas Adams, script editor in the late 1970s, was developing ideas during his tenure that he would later expand into his own celebrated work. The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy shares more creative DNA with the Doctor Who of that period than is generally acknowledged. The script editors were the show's hidden architects, their names in end credits that few viewers read for a role that few understood. The show they shaped is the one that millions remember.
Improbable as it may seem, dear boy, I think the child, Dorothea...
Dodo.
Oh, yes, of course, my dear. Dodo is right.
Fact 7. John Pertwee resented his era. John Pertwee played the Third Doctor from 1970 to 1974, and his era is remembered fondly by a generation of viewers. What is less well known is that Pertwee himself had significant reservations about much of it. Pertwee was vocal within the production about his frustration with what he saw as repetitive storytelling. The Earth-based format, introduced partly for budget reasons, meant the show spent years telling variations of the same story. Alien invasion thwarted by UNIT, usually in a quarry in southern England. He was also deeply unhappy when Roger Delgado, who played the Master and was his close colleague, died in a car accident in Turkey in 1973. Pertwee had intended to leave the show alongside Delgado, and Delgado's death removed the planned creative conclusion to their on-screen relationship. Pertwee left the following year without the ending he had intended. He carried real grief from the loss of his friend into his final season, and that grief is visible if you know to look for it. He remained associated with the show for the rest of his life and returned for anniversary specials. But the Third Doctor era was, for the man at its centre, as much a story of constraint and loss as of the adventure audiences enjoyed.
Well, I better make this machine safe.
Can I help?
On my own.
Is that wise?
Well, perhaps not.
Well, then
but I prefer to work that way.
Fact 8. The Master was mishandled badly. The Master, introduced in 1971 as the Doctor's arch-nemesis, was one of the most promising creations in the show's history, and one of the most consistently mismanaged. The pattern began almost immediately after Roger Delgado's death in 1973. The character was brought back in 1976 in a heavily decayed form, a skeletal creature surviving on stolen life force. The concept had potential but was never developed with the care it deserved. The Master became a recurring presence whose appearances rarely added meaningfully to the mythology. Anthony Ainley took over the role in 1981 and played it with energy.
This is a poor welcome, my lord.
But, sire!
Hear us!
But was consistently let down by material that reduced him to a pantomime villain. Writers gave him elaborate disguises and convoluted schemes, but rarely explored who he actually was. The BBC made decisions about the Master's appearances based largely on scheduling and marketing, rather than storytelling logic. He appeared when convenient and disappeared when not, with little concern for narrative continuity. A character capable of genuine menace was reduced across more than a decade to someone who appeared in a cape and laughed. It remains one of the classic series' most significant wasted opportunities.
We have come to ask but a pittance. 3 marks per night's fee.
Fact 9. Sylvester McCoy inherited chaos.
Can't say I share the Ranny's taste in pets.
The Tetraps are nobody's pets, and you'll be wise not to forget it.
This is what I'll never forget.
When Sylvester McCoy took over in 1987, he inherited a show in serious trouble. The budget had been cut repeatedly. The scheduling had been moved to compete directly with Coronation Street, a decision that looked less like programming strategy and more like deliberate sabotage. McCoy and script editor Andrew Cartmel responded with ambition the circumstances barely allowed. They began developing a darker, more mysterious Doctor, one with hidden history and moral complexity the show had rarely attempted. The results in the final 2 seasons were some of the most interesting storytelling the classic series ever produced. Almost nobody saw it. The audience had been eroded by years of poor scheduling and the BBC's visible indifference. The people still watching were watching a show quietly becoming something new, but there were too few of them to make a difference. When the show was cancelled in 1989, McCoy's era was dismissed by critics who had largely stopped paying attention. It took years and the growth of home video for a reappraisal to take hold. McCoy was handed a broken show and left it better than he found it. the BBC cancelled it anyway.
Be careful, Doctor. The grounds outside are a minefield of traps.
Nothing outside compared with this.
A harmless asteroid?
Fact 10. The show survived despite the BBC.
You're in no position to threaten us. I don't make threats, but I do keep promises.
The story most often told about classic Doctor Who is one of institutional support, a beloved national programme nurtured across 26 years. The actual history is considerably less flattering to the corporation. Doctor Who was underfunded from its earliest years. It survived by the ingenuity of production teams who made cardboard and paint look like alien worlds, and extracted compelling performances from actors working under relentless pressure for modest pay. The BBC's most significant contributions were the decisions not to cancel it. Decisions that were themselves often reversed or made for the wrong reasons. When the show needed investment, it usually received indifference instead. The people who kept it alive were the writers, directors, script editors, and actors who cared about the programme and fought repeatedly to protect it against an organisation that treated it as a scheduling obligation rather than a creative achievement. When Doctor Who returned in 2005, the BBC presented the revival as a bold decision to restore a British classic. What they were actually doing was returning to something their predecessors had neglected and eventually abandoned. The classic series survived 26 years, not because of the BBC. It survived in spite of it. Classic Doctor Who survived budget cuts, cancellations, deleted episodes, and an institution that never fully believed in it. And it still managed to create some of the most imaginative television ever made. If that story deserves to be told, hit subscribe, leave a comment below, and I will see you in the next one.